people learn more from watching the way you do things and how you spend your time than anything to do with how you tell them to do things. That's the key.
What does a good chief exec chairman relationship look like to you?
You made 3, maybe 4, these massive strategic calls.
Did you find it similar in America or different?
If you grow too fast, what happens is...
You're hiring over 10,000 people a year.
Yeah.
Wow. Welcome to Billionaire Business. My name's Ian Fishwick. I was an MD or Chief Exec in the UK IT and Telecoms industry for 3 decades. The biggest business I ran was about 1,200 people. That's nothing compared to today's guest.
And I'm Chris Godsmark, and for the last 20 plus years, I've been floating businesses, raising money for businesses, selling businesses, and I've worked with Ian on and off.
Very few of us in life will ever get the chance to run a £1 billion business. Even fewer will run one on both sides of the Atlantic. Today's guest was formerly the chief exec of BT, one of the UK's best-known brand names. To put it in context, it's worth about 18 billion. But later on in his career, he became the president of Salesforce, an American company with a valuation of about 183 billion. So today's all about lessons in leadership. And what's the similarities and differences in trying to run such a giant business on both sides of the Atlantic? Is one country better than the other? Or is it a bit more nuanced than that? It's an absolute pleasure to welcome, more importantly, another Liverpool fan. Gavin Patterson, good to see you.
Good to see you both. I haven't seen you in ages, actually. It's like a little reunion today.
Gavin, great to see you. Just to set the scene, when you sort of relinquish a full-time role as a CEO, normally you think you're less busy. I suspect, given the amount of roles and responsibilities and people you're working with, that's not the case. But just give us a snapshot of how you're spending your time now.
Over the last couple of years, I've built a portfolio, which is a mixture of private companies and a couple of public companies, some in the US, one in India, one in Israel, one in Norway, one in Paris. And I've also complemented that with I chair a charity, Alzheimer's Research UK, here in the UK. And I sit on the board of London School of Economics.
And we're going to touch on various different aspects of your career, Gavin. But if I can just take you back to the earlier days, you started, or you've certainly earlier in your career, you were at Procter & Gamble, P&G, and a great training ground for many, many people who've gone on to be famous sort of CEOs in the business community. Just tell us a little bit about what you were doing at P&G, and also, it's a business where you're getting responsibility at a relatively early stage for brands that consumers know and love, which is a hell of a responsibility, isn't it?
It is. So I joined P&G in 1990, I think. I'd come out of university. I'd had a small business when I was at university, and I really enjoyed it. But I realized I had a lot to learn about running a business, and the place you went to learn how to run a business in those days was P&G. And it was because they offered you the chance to become a brand manager within typically 3 years, and you got to make the decisions, or at least propose the decisions on what to do with a brand in a country. And you were, often 24, 25. And that really forces responsibility onto you, and gets you used to making decisions in a business. And in some ways, it's a bit sad. I don't think those roles exist in the same way anymore.
And is it all about, obviously it's all about growing the top line, right? It's incredible at that age, because I think you're responsible for, was it Pantene?
Pantene was the main brand I was
which is a globally known brand. I mean, how on earth do you sort of move the needle on a brand like that in your mid-20s?
It's not simply about top-line growth. I mean, P&G is very disciplined, and it teaches you the importance of, driving sustainable top and bottom line over a number of years. It teaches you how to build a brand equity so that is sustainable growth and is something that when you leave the business, ultimately leaves your successor with something to build from. It teaches you the importance of developing people. So in P&G, you're only promoted from within. That's one of the tenets of the business. And so
That's very unusual, isn't it?
It's highly unusual. And it means that everybody in the business is expected to demonstrate not only how they build the business, but also how they build the organization. It's part of the sort of the principles, if you like, that certainly I use to, even to this day, to advise the businesses I'm involved in, comes from that period.
You made a pretty massive change. You went from that into a tech business. So in a sense, they were run by techies in the main. Did you find that marketing background to be useful when you went across?
Yeah, well, because a couple of things. One is I'm an engineer originally, so
Okay,
I come from a technical background.
right.
So understanding how things work, how to build networks, how to run networks. I wouldn't consider myself an expert in any way, but I can ask the right sort of questions. What marketing and more importantly brand management gave you is it gives you a prism, if you like, through which you can look at the business from a consumer or ultimately a user's perspective. And that's one of the most important things I learned from that period, and it's applicable now as much as it was back then. When I look at tech companies and software businesses, I really go back to how is the application used, how is the platform used. Is the CEO somebody who focuses on truly understanding how the application is going to change people's lives? And if they don't have that in their mentality, everything else at some point doesn't work. So if people aren't using your product more, you can't get money from them and charge them for the service, and ultimately you can't grow the top and bottom line.
See, that's interesting because when we started this series, we weren't quite sure what themes were going to come through. And regardless of what industry we talk to, that absolute focus on understanding your customer and what your customer does as the very, very top, somebody called it a North Star. It's funny, isn't it? It's coming up in almost every conversation.
You start with users, then you go to purchasers, then you just work through the chain, and ultimately as the business owners, only when the other parts fall into place do you make good money over the long term.
But it's interesting, you've worked in you started off fast-moving consumer goods, if that's the right way to describe them, where you kind of know how you sell in different supermarket chains, and you've got this incredible amount of real-time data, and everything is happening in real time, right? You move into BT, where I'm not disparaging the telecoms market, but essentially you've got millions and millions of customers who pay every month on direct debit. And so in a sense, is that a slower moving super tanker? When you come in, it's harder to sort of change the proposition to the customer compared to a fast moving business.
It's almost the opposite, actually. So certainly when I was in FMCG, there was no real-time data at all.
Really?
You shipped products to supermarkets. You got panel data from Nielsen about market share. You did focus groups. You did concept tests. You did bases tests. These sorts of things to understand how the
So it's
the
only in
product
the
gets used.
2000s that the big
there was
data
no
boom came.
before the internet, there was no real-time data in FMCG at all.
Wow.
Okay.
Different maybe at a retail level, but not at the manufacturer's level. Contrast that with telecoms, and actually you knew what people were doing all the time. You knew you had extraordinary amounts of data. You're overwhelmed with it at times, and it's figuring out how you could use that while respecting people's privacy was one of the challenges as you came through the 90s and early 2000s.
But when you're running something as big as BT, people often say it's like trying to change an oil tanker. It's really, really slow. And yet you kind of ignored that a bit and took some really big decisions. I mean, what was the background to them?
I took over in 2013, and there'd been a few tough years before. where Ian Livingston had been the CEO, and he'd really addressed the cost base, got the business stable and growing from a profitable perspective. But the remit the board gave me is, okay, now we need to start growing the top line. And to do that just through your existing propositions is very difficult because you're up against regulatory price reductions and competition that are eating away at your core business. So, if you look at the business you retain year on year and you take that into effect, you're probably facing like a 10% decline. So the chance was there to do some pretty aggressive moves. There was a very strong platform that Ian had left. We were able to take full advantage of the Olympics that gave a huge lift, not just to London, but for BT as one of the main sponsors. It was a fantastic lift for the organisation. So culturally, we were getting a confidence back, and we chose to get into sport, to really drive the first stages of fibre take-up when we did fibre to the cabinet. We then had a view that we needed to be back in mobile, having been asked to sell our mobile business back in the 1990s.
Do that one, because for such a big business, effectively it was a U-turn, wasn't it? BT had owned a mobile business, sold it, and then you said, no, actually, we need to get back into it. So how did you manage to win the hearts and minds of the board to say, actually, we need to go back into mobile? We got that bit wrong.
Well, you need to go back to why was the mobile business sold, and it was a very different regulatory environment, and BT was going bankrupt. It had 30 billion of debt.
They needed the money.
Yeah, and shareholders said, look, the business needs to be restructured. We'll put it into basically two parts, sold off Yellow Pages at the same time, I think. And
which was a good call, by the way.
It was a perfect time to sell. And BT will focus on fixed. O2, which had a fantastic brand and licenses in a number of countries, would be given its head. And if you look at what happened and the returns for shareholders from that move, it actually worked out pretty well. But going back to, as we've talked about already, the user, the way the technology was moving, how could you take full advantage of the convergence of fixed and mobile networks? Well, we had to get back into mobile because not only was voice moving to mobile, but increasingly data was moving to mobile. And it was a big gap in our portfolio. And you could see in other markets that this was an opportunity. Call these things, it's more luck than judgment, to be perfectly honest. So we decided we wanted to get more into mobile. We were going to do it initially organically. So we picked up some spectrum. We were going to use Wi-Fi. We had a big Wi-Fi network out of home. And the mobile operators were beginning to be a little bit anxious about this. And one of them, I won't go into a lot of detail, but one of them came forward and said, well, would you be interested in BT acquiring us? So we started a conversation, but that got leaked around the others. And ultimately, we had what's called a Spanish auction where we had a choice and it helped bring the price down. And in the end, we got the one we really wanted, which was EE.
And the fascinating thing is today, I think BT's consumer brand is shifting towards EE, isn't it? Effectively, that BT brand that's been around for 30 or 40 years.
Personally, I think that isn't what I would do. I think, and look what AT&T did a few years ago in the US. When you have, the incumbent brand with the B in the British in the brand name, and you have a customer base that's been with you for a long time, dislodging them by forcing them onto another brand when they don't want to move is not something I would necessarily advocate. And if you want to simplify,
grow with brands, isn't it?
If you want to simplify your portfolio, simplify it and invest in BT would be my advice.
Clearly, there were some very big cultural changes there. Let's go into sports. Let's go back into mobile. I've lost track of how many thousand people you had at BT. How do you get them all to understand what you're trying to do and take them with you? Because I mean, you can't possibly know everybody when it's just that big. So how do you approach something like that?
Probably the biggest challenge of a CEO is culture. How do you create the right environment so people know what you want to do, or know what you're trying to do, know what they should be doing when nobody's looking and nobody's giving them orders. And when you're was previously a government department, public sector organization, that was quite a challenge. You've got to be the culture that you've got to behave in the way you want the culture to evolve. People learn more from watching the way you do things and how you spend your time than anything to do with how you tell them to do things. You can put the words up on the wall, but it actually is the culture something that you're seeing on a day-to-day basis in the way decisions are made, both around investments and around the organization. And that's the key.
It is fascinating, though, that you left BT. It was a very different business to when you took on that role. And what's also fascinating about that is you didn't sort of arrive at BT as CEO. You'd done various divisional roles, but actually you made 3, maybe 4. I mean, these massive strategic calls, but going to sport, buying EE.
The investment in fibre.
Both
investments.
These are big decisions to take, and you managed to carry the board with you all the way through.
Yes, I mean, I think I was blessed with a very really good board, and the chairman, Mike Rake, who appointed me, was a fabulous chair for me. Gave me space to operate. Was a great sounding board. Together we were able to
influence that relationship.
Influence the other board members.
What does a good chief exec chairman relationship look like to you?
Well, they've got to have a respect for each other's job, and as a CEO, you've got to respect the fact that it's the chairman's job to manage the board, and you need to help she. Do that, recognizing that ultimately your decisions could come to a vote. So you've got to, they very rarely do, but ultimately you've got to think about strategies of how to bring board members along for the ride. So that closeness, without being so close, particularly outside of the board meeting, is really, really important. So you have to have a deep level of trust, a common understanding of what you're trying to achieve, an understanding of risk, an understanding of where board members may come from in terms of the debate, and then together you manage the meeting.
I think that's one of the most misunderstood things, because people watch the TV and they like the drama. They kind of think that boards vote on things. I don't think I've ever chaired a meeting where the board's voted on anything, because my whole thing is if you can't win it by the power of the argument, then you probably need to go and have a think about it, right? So I'm with you. The way it happens in practice is not the way you see it on the TV.
You don't always get complete consensus, though.
And what do you do when you hit that problem?
Effectively, you've got to go with the majority without forcing a vote, I think. But I've been in situations where a vote's been called, and
really?
Yeah. But it's unusual, Ian. There's no question about it.
And when you went across, let's go across to Salesforce, right? Did you find it similar in America or different? What was the change?
Well, it's very different. And to be clear, I didn't go across as a CEO. I went across as President and Chief Revenue Officer of Salesforce. So
which is an interesting thing, though, isn't it? Sorry to interrupt, Cam, but you'd done one of the biggest jobs in UK PLC. I mean, massive job, and you didn't go in as CEO. Obviously, you must have thought quite long and hard about that.
When I finished at BT, I was exhausted, and I didn't want to do another CEO job. And I initially thought about going plural.
Why was that?
Plural at that point. the intensity of the job is it's just hard to describe.
It's also quite lonely at times, isn't it?
It's very lonely. You're working extraordinarily long hours. The sort of decisions that you end up taking are pretty hard at times, pretty agonizing. And if you look at the sort of pictures before and after, I had black hair. So you don't, but certainly BT CEOs typically last 4 to 6 years. It's like at that point
It's not a job you do for a decade, is
No.
it? No.
So go on, let's go back to America then. So different in what way?
Well, first of all, as Chris says, I was going back to a functional role. Much bigger company, different sector, different country. I didn't sit on the board. Only the CEO actually sits on the board in most US companies. Not even the CFO in many.
The CFO doesn't sit on either.
No. So it's a different governance model. But for me, it was an opportunity to branch out, get into technology, get a front seat at one of the most exciting tech businesses in the world. And it's, that's why I decided to do it. An opportunity to work in San Francisco and in the Bay Area, a chance to open my mind into technology and software. And one of the things I've learned along the way is it's far more important that you choose the sector right than it is to think you're going to be the best person in the sector. So, you and I chose, in TMT, we probably chose the wrong T, didn't we?
Were you able to move the needle?
Yeah. I was very lucky because, if you can call it luck, it was a growing business. As all software businesses, it's about top line growth, number 1, 2, and 3 priority.
So what was the different challenges when you were?
Well, it's the other thing I had, just to finish that point, is COVID was horrible for many businesses, and obviously very difficult for people around the world. But it did help software businesses, and it gave you a tailwind for a few years. So the biggest challenge was, funny enough, hiring enough salespeople.
See, that's interesting because people think that it's really difficult when you're going backwards and you're shrinking a business. But in the days when we met, I went from 50 people to 1,500 in 5 years. Rapid growth like that and trying to find quality people was a nightmare. But also, people got promoted to levels where they suddenly have 100 people and you think, actually, you should have hired a boss is what you should have done.
Well, you make an excellent point. It's, if you grow too fast, what happens is the people who are in your organization are spending so much time recruiting people, retaining people, teaching people, that nobody's doing in this case, the selling. And there's a sort of sweet spot you get to at about 30% growth where, when you factor in the number of people who leave the organization each year through performance or being headhunted, you're trying to find, if you want 30% growth in an enterprise software business, you're looking for 30% more people net. But if you look at gross, that's probably near 40, even 50% more people a year. That's quite an undertaking to find that many people and to keep the growth going, because it takes them a while to,
because the reality is that not all salespeople work, do they?
No, they don't.
That's the
no. You
the
learn
real truth
pretty
of it.
quickly if they do,
Yeah.
and it's they tend to leave if they're not getting paid commissions, etc. But that was the limiting factor.
What are the differences of sort of UK large enterprise business culture and US? You were in really a very high growth, West Coast based business, very different to what had been an incumbent. What were the sort of differences that you
Well, the drive on growth is the biggest difference, and the incentives, the mentality, the perseverance. It's just fundamentally different. As I was saying, the number, when I asked my boss, Mark Benioff, what my priorities were, it was like 1, 2, and 3, growth. I don't want you to, radically change the go-to-market model. I don't want you to digitalize it, just drive growth, which meant, quite frankly, it was probably the least interesting job I did in my whole life.
No, but I mean,
ultimately it drove results.
But you're making that sound easy, right? If I turn up as a chairman and say, would you mind growing 30% next year? That's not the easiest task in the world. I mean, so what do you do?
Well, I mean, I ran sales and distribution. And I had sort of 30,000 people. And
30,000?
Yeah.
Just in sales?
Yeah, sales.
So you must have been
then they weren't all quota carrying.
So you were hiring over 10,000 people a year?
Yeah.
Wow.
And enterprise selling, even now, it'll be interesting to see how AI really changes this. But it's a very simple equation, which is you hire, people who like selling and are good at selling and show they can sell. You give them a quota and you tell them, get on with it. That's what drives your top line number.
So is that entirely about just hiring more people?
Hiring more people. Hiring more people, the right people, incentivizing them the right way. Really good salespeople, exceptionally good at understanding how commissions work and really optimize their earnings. And so you've got to be really smart about how you set up commissions. And they just know how to close deals.
And that whole commission structure thing, something that's interested me in many, many different businesses that I've worked with. Did you make any changes to incentives? How do you incentivize someone who's maybe got a $10 million quota, maybe more, maybe less? How do you incentivize them to, almost double their sales productivity?
It's all to do with how you sort of allocate the quota, how you put the commission on different products and services, and you just have to play tunes on it. But really, really good salespeople know exactly how they're going to deliver their quota and more, because what you do to incentivize them to go beyond their number is commissions accelerate as you get to 110, 120% of quota.
Did you change the international countries that you operated in, or is it just doing more in the same places?
I think 90% of the business was done in 10 countries. So I tended to move away from a sort of regional-based structure, took out a layer and made sure I had strong country leaders in those key geographies. And so I had closer access to them and I gave them more responsibility. The difficulty in big organizations is spans and layers just clog up the organization. So the more you can flatten it, the more you can, get to the decision makers and the people who are driving the performance. The closer you can make that link, the more agile you can be.
Do you kind of have a view on what's the optimum number of layers? Or
we should never be more than 7.
It's a very specific number.
Regardless of size of organization.
Like the Catholic Church. I'm not Catholic. My wife is, but she tells me between the Pope and, a deacon, there are 7 layers. So if it works for the Catholic Church.
So you reach, I guess, a point in career, point in life where that came to a natural conclusion at Salesforce. Were you thinking at that point, well, firstly, what did you learn? What did you take away? Are there things that organization did which sort of operationally, organization-wise, were quite special, if you like?
Well, I mean, it's a remarkable company. I mean, the thing in software is it's very difficult to stay on top. And if you think about the other businesses that were around at that time, it started in the late 90s, they die off pretty quickly. Yeah. And or many have. And
there is competition, isn't there, for Salesforce?
There is. Yeah. It's so it is a remarkable business. It's sort of continued to reinvent itself and stay relevant. And that's largely down to the strength of personality and of Mark as the founder. His energy and his dynamism and his ambition has carried it a long, long way. And he's done it in a way that is not just about driving results for shareholders, but actually ensuring that all stakeholders along the way benefit from it.
Are there any aspects of what you learned in the States that you'd bring to the UK?
Well, I think the focus on growth and really learning how to scale a go-to-market organization, these are the things I really took away more than anything else.
You're doing all sorts of things now. That includes mentoring, obviously, right? But what kind of people are you mentoring? And is there a Gavin Patterson template that you kind of take in your head with you?
No, I can't tell you who I mentor because I don't think that's
Okay. So let's go back to the Gavin template.
I guess you sort of reflect on your career and whether you write it down or not. There's a sort of way you do business, and mine was developed over my time at P&G, the time in that we met, Telewest and BT, and then Salesforce, and then it really distills into, I don't know, a dozen principles and a bunch of experiences that you can see because you've been through them. They're going to happen. You can see the signs they're going to happen.
Just give us an example of pick a couple of your principles. Don't do all 12, but
just the importance of the importance of culture and the way the CEO needs to drive them. We talked about, continuing to focus on the usage and how your users use your products and services, developing talent, promoting from within, giving people a pathway through the organization, brands, these sorts of things, how to drive growth, how to make difficult people decisions and things like this. So there's all sorts of things you've sort of been through over the time. The years, and as we've said, the job as a CEO can be very lonely, and you sometimes just want to talk things through with someone who doesn't have
an axe to grind
or a dog in the fight for your career there and then. I mean,
let's do the career thing. Not everybody clearly will end up running a giant organization, but many people want to get on. Right. What's the one bit of advice in terms of what kind of reputation people need to develop? What advice would you give them?
There's always a sort of feeling that you've got to be a big talker, and that strategy is the place to be, and it's the most important function. But I'm not so sure about that. Strategy is important. Don't get me wrong, but there are multiple strategies to deliver the outcome you want. There always is. Far more important is execution. And execution trumps strategy every single day of the week. So building a reputation, building a name for getting stuff done, doing what you say you're going to do, not being somebody who says yes and then doesn't deliver, really is a standout quality in individuals. And it's something I look for, a track record in the people who I appoint. What's their track record of, did they do what they say they were going to do?
And is that about something as simple as people just sort of being decisive? Because, as human beings, frankly, there are people who find it hard to make decisions. You've seen that in politics, you've seen that in business, right? Is it as simple as that? Or is it also about picking the right people and the right organizational structures, if you like?
Decision-making under pressure is a distinguishing factor for CEOs because the really difficult decisions come down to you. And if you're often under time pressure to make them, and you've got to make a call when you've probably got enough data for a sort of 60-40, and you don't have the opportunity to push for the data that would give you a 70-30. So in some ways, it's one of the things you learn from P&G. P&G, very data-driven organization, very analytical, very structured in its thinking. But the way you're taught how to judge advertising is the first thing you look at in an ad is, what does your gut tell you? What is your instinct about this? Capture that and then diagnose it. And I've found as I've gone through life, particularly, and gone through my career, particularly as I've gone into senior jobs and C-suite jobs, that mentality, that ability to say, okay, what does my gut say? And then rationalize that and test it rather than simply working from analysis and what does it tell you to do. So you've got to be able to think both ways. And I would say that gut instinct is probably more important than ever. There are plenty of people who give you the analytical view. Very few people will say, actually, you know what? My instinct tells me we need to do this.
That's a fantastic way to end, I think, because some people just get obsessed with and waiting for the perfect data. I'm not sure that day ever comes.
There's always enough data to make an argument to do almost anything.
It feels, Gavin, like you'll be in the thick of many new businesses, corporate decisions. There's a lot to go for.
Well, I hope so. I love work. I enjoy work. I enjoy helping people. And, there's a few years left ahead of me, I hope.
As ever, it's been an absolute pleasure. Lovely to see you.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks very much. Ian, that was a real masterclass in leading a business. Gavin's led huge businesses, I mean, some of the biggest in the UK. And I suppose one of the lessons for people watching this is that you've got to lead by example.
There's one thing he said to me, it's not just for giant businesses, it's all the way down to little tiny ones. It is, people watch what you do, not what you say. The number of times I've started presentations with, watch what I do, not what I say. You can't just stand up and say something, stick a poster on the wall and it'll work. Right. So I think that's a huge lesson for everybody.
It's a great lesson. And I think what he's kind of saying also is, I want to work with people who get things done. Now that's so obvious, but actually not everyone you work with, they don't deliver, right?
Well, that I thought was really interesting when he said, people think that to get to the top, you've got to be great at strategy. And let's do a 100-man company. There's probably 2 people involved in strategy, and one of them is the chief exec. But there's 98 others who've got to do something. So that idea of if you can get a reputation for being somebody who gets stuff done, well, there's a lot more opportunities for promotion in that 98 bit than there is in the 2, right? So it seems obvious afterwards, but it's not the way most people think about it.
It was also quite a personal interview, wasn't it? Because Gavin said he talked about the role of the chief exec, particularly in a really big business. It's incredibly tough. You think about it, you've got the board up here, the chairman, you've got all your management team, and let's be honest about it, like politics, there'll be people in the management team who want your job, right? You've then got 100,000 employees, you've got the government, you've got regulators. I mean, that's a really tough job.
It just shows you, doesn't it, that some people carry on for a full career, but a lot get to that level and then do kind of burn out. And I thought there was some huge honesty in there. But it was also interesting to try and contrast when he then went across to America to see the differences between the two. And in some of the episodes, we've talked about how to scale up. And there's a danger people get hung up on technology. We did one episode on Skyscanner, and they were discussing how they translated websites into different languages and things. He had the old-fashioned way of doing it, 30,000 salespeople and hiring 10,000 a year. Sometimes it's just boring volume.
Absolutely. And an interesting career, because he was chief exec of, one of the UK's best-known businesses. He then takes a job in Salesforce, which was all about, as you say, very American growth. But he wasn't the chief executive, and he did it for specific reasons. And now, of course, he's gone plural. And did he say he had 20 different things on the go, chairmanships, etc.? So we've definitely not heard the last of Gavin Patterson, have we?
For a guy who was slowing down a bit, that wasn't exactly slowing down, was it? Right. What did you think about the differences between leading a business in America and over here? Clearly, he said it's very straightforward. It's very aggressive. It's growth. How would you contrast that with the UK?
The UK business culture is, as you say, more nuanced, isn't it? That's the reality. The Brits, we've got lots of affinities to the Americans, but if you ask an American, how's your day going? They'll say it's going great. If you ask a Brit, it'll be, well, up and down, So does that affect our business performance? That's one of the, America's growing at 3 or 4%. The UK's basically flat.
I think it's more about ambition. The fact that they're obsessed with growth. We tend to be quite reserved, but I also think is our business thinking. They might say, hey, let's raise 100 million and go and try and grow this thing. We're more likely to say, shall we raise 1 million first and see how it goes? So I think that's one of the really big attitudes. It's an attitude to risk, isn't it?
It is. But I think going back to Gavin, the lesson I take away, the lesson we can all learn is lead by example.